and up and up it goes. Where Argentina's benchmark interest rate stops, nobody knows. Buckle up, people. On Wednesday, it was 30.25%. On Thursday, raised to 33.25%. Today, get this, a record 40%. All these moves, part of a desperate effort, and you can call it desperate, by the central bank to prop up the collapsing peso and meet an inflation target of 15%. The government also announced plans to rein in state spending. Now, Friday's actions did stop that terrible slide of the peso, did lead to some strengthening. Alberto Ramos is the head of Latin America economics at Goldman Sachs. I mean, again, I hate to be cheesy, but we're not crying for Argentina here. We are screaming for Argentina here. How did it all go so wrong?
It's a tough situation. It's a combination of external and domestic factors. Outside, global markets have been somewhat distressed, and there's not been a very benign and friendly environment for emerging market currencies. But then there were the local shenanigans and idiosyncratic factors related to the perception that perhaps the central bank was not truly independent from the fiscal authority, the fact that inflation has been somewhat sticky, and a number of other factors, including some political resistance to the fiscal adjustment measures that altogether led to this blow up of the currency.
Where do we go from here? I mean, if you're sitting down with Macri's government right now, and they've clearly are going to have a very stressful weekend to try and figure out where you go next, where do they go next with this? These numbers are horrible. They are. Time will tell.
I'm an economist. I'm not a psychologist. So in a way, I think the policy reaction has been the right one. It may not be enough. Time will tell. But I can guarantee, and success is not guaranteed. But I can guarantee you that the probability of succeeding is now higher than if they have not done and reacted the way they did. What you need to do in a situation like this, in order to restore confidence, is to hike interest rates. They did so fast and aggressively. To tighten the fiscal targets. They did so this morning. And then you have to hope for the best. I think we're in a better position today than we were 3 days ago.
Okay, and that's good news. But let's face it, these numbers are stomach churning. I mean, absolutely stomach churning. What happens now in terms of, we've been in this exact same position before? I know you discussed Argentinian politics. It's been treacherous there for decades. It's not like that's something new. Why again? Why now? Why can't they just seem to get it together?
Again, this is a legacy issue. The previous administration and the populist experiment behind it left behind a large number of macroeconomic imbalances, very high inflation, very large fiscal deficit. We have to add now also a significant current account deficit. So the twin deficits, fiscal and current account, are now tracking above 10% of GDP. So if you screen across the landscape of emerging economies, Argentina screens out as being vulnerable because their external funding needs are quite high. And that as this is a manifestation of that, is a manifestation of a very large fiscal deficit. So the reality that has not changed dramatically, and it needs to change, is the need to rein in on the very large fiscal deficits.
Let's be clear, we're not talking about a default in the short term anyway. There's no one saying that, right?
No, I mean, and this is not forever. Like 40% interest rates are indeed staggering and impressive, but and you know, they have to be there until the job is done, until confidence is restored, and you bring order and anchor the exchange rate. Once that is achieved, you'll be in a position to cut rates. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be challenging. Yeah. Inflation is still very, very high.
And a larger question about Latin America in general. Let's even leaving Venezuela aside. You know, the challenges in our economies like Argentina and Brazil, and even the weakness that we shouldn't be seeing in places like Chile. You're an optimistic guy. You look like an optimistic. How many times can we go back to Latin America and say you show so much promise, and yet it's always seems to be 2 steps back? Not even any forward.
You're right. I mean, growth is still pretty modest on average. You know, even during the good years when the external conditions are relatively favorable, we talk about periods of relatively high commodity prices and abundant and cheap liquidity, it's still quite difficult for Latin America to deliver growth rates that are high enough to empower and enfranchise large segments of the population. That is still the main challenge, and you're absolutely right. That's the challenge today. Is the same challenge of 10, 20 years ago. We have to find ways to increase the growth potential. That requires more investment in physical capital, in infrastructure and other things, more investment in human capital. We need to invest more. We need to save more. We need to trade more. Latin America is still extraordinarily close to trade. Asia is an example that they should emulate in that regard.
Yeah, you said the solutions to the problems are there. No one's taking them up. Argentina has a G20 at the end of the year. You're hopeful maybe things will look a little different by then?
Hopefully they'll look better. I mean, again, these authorities are credible and they are somewhat orthodox in their thinking. They are facing a complex situation. Some of the issues that they are trying to address today, they were not created by policy mistakes by this administration, but was a legacy from previous heterodox policy moves that left us in the situation we're trying to solve today.